Good evening. Welcome to Virtual Balticon 54, and welcome to the panel, Jews in Space.
Hi, I'm Marvin Pinkert, and I'm director of the Jewish Museum of Maryland. I've had the extraordinary privilege of spending about 32 years, nearly half my life, is managing the development of exhibits at museums, first at the Museum of Science and Industry, then at the National Archives in DC, and for the last 8 years at the JMM. Over that span of time, I estimate that the exhibit teams I've led have produced more than 90 exhibits on topics ranging from mazes to mahjong and from Magna Carta to the moon landing. Now, I know you're supposed to love all your children equally, but with 90 kids, some are just bound to be more endearing than others. Tonight, I'm offering a preview of JMM's next project, Jews in Space, a project that I hope you'll love as much as I do. But in doing so, I realize I'm violating one of the fundamental laws of the public speaking universe. Never talk to an audience about a subject that they know better than you do. My expertise in Jewish law is not rabbinic. And with respect to space science, I'm no academic. And as for science fiction, I'm merely a fan. So I'll try to compensate for knowledge with enthusiasm. And I look forward to learning from you when we reach the end of the talk at the Q&A. The Jews in Space exhibit actually at the Center for Jewish History in New York last year. It had not been their plan to travel the exhibit at all, but we persuaded our colleagues that not only would Baltimore be a great venue for their show, but we would match the opening of the exhibit to the opening of Balticon. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came our way, and that's why we're not opening Jews in Space until September, why you're not enjoying drinks at the hotel bar, and why I'm speaking to you from my basement like a bad episode of Young Sheldon. But what good will it do to fetch? Instead, let's begin with a little humor, which is exactly where our colleagues in New York began in selecting the title for the exhibit. Mel Brooks made History of the World Part 1 in 1981. The film focused on Roman gladiators, the Inquisition as a Broadway musical, and the Court of Versailles. But Brooks couldn't resist the shtick of putting in a preview of coming attractions.
See, Jews in Space!
Jews out in space, presuming alone, protecting the Hebrew race. We're Jews out in space. If trouble appears, we'll put it right back in its place. And Goyim attack us, we'll give them a smack, we'll slap them right back in the face.
While Mel Brooks would later make Spaceballs, May the Schwartz Be With You, there is no History of the World Part 2, let alone a movie entitled Jews in Space. It's said that all humor contains a grain of truth, and the folks in New York had made quite a loaf out of all that grain. Their exhibit included 3 primary areas of connection between the Jewish experience and outer space. A section on actual space explorers, the 15 cosmonauts and astronauts who've gone into orbit. A section on the history of Jewish interests in astronomy and astrology, and a section on the role of outer space in the imagination of people of Jewish heritage. Our community's many engagements with science fiction and popular culture. Since our gallery was slightly larger than theirs, we were given permission to add to the exhibit. Additions include artifacts from our own collection, materials on the history of Maryland in space, including the surprising importance of this state in the development of today's unmanned exploration of the galaxy, as well as just a few items that I was passionate about. There are some privileges to being the director. At the time Mel Brooks created the faux trailer for Jews in Space, no American or Israeli astronaut had been sent into orbit. Not a single astronaut in the Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo crews was Jewish. However, over the last 36 years, we've made up for lost time. Our representation in the astronaut corps is roughly twice the percentage of self-identified Jews in the American population. The first Jewish spaceman is actually a cosmonaut rather than an astronaut. Boris Volynov is the commander of the Soyuz 5 mission launched in January 1969. He is part of the first transfer of a crew from one spacecraft to another. Actually, this was Volynov's third scheduled mission. His crew had been scrubbed from 2 previous flights. It is unclear whether Volinov's Jewish heritage had anything to do with his being pulled from his 2 earlier assignments, but there are suspicions. In any case, his first flight was a bumpy ride, ending with his module's parachute failing to fully deploy, causing such a hard landing that it broke some of his teeth. Dr. Judith Resnick grew up in California but had Maryland ties. Her doctorate in electrical engineering is from the University of Maryland, and she served as a biomedical engineer at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda before joining NASA. Her voyage aboard the shuttle Discovery marked just the second time that an American woman went into space and the first time that an American Jew went into orbit. In her 145 hours in space, Dr. Resnick's mission specialty was the operation of the shuttle's robot arm. And no, the Canada arm will not be in the exhibit. Among other things, it won't fit into our hall. But we do expect to have some artifacts that belong to Dr. Resnick, as well as tributes to her that were made after her tragic death in the launch of the shuttle Challenger in 1986. Ilan Wolferman's mother had survived Auschwitz before she and her husband emigrated to Israel in 1949. That's where Ilan was born, in Ramat Gan, outside Tel Aviv in 1954. Before joining the Israeli Air Force, Ilan decided that he needed a more Israeli name and changed his name to Ramon after the crater Ramon shown here. While it's not unusual for a piece of geography to be named after a national hero, it's somewhat more unusual for a national hero to adopt the name of a piece of geography. When he went into space in the shuttle Columbia in 2003, he made a point of carrying with him this drawing of a view from Earth from the surface of the moon, made by a 14-year-old boy at Theresienstadt concentration camp. Ramon's first trip into space was unfortunately also his last, as he perished with the rest of his crewmates when the shuttle broke apart on re-entry over Texas. I don't want to leave you with the impression that every Jewish journey into space came to a bad end. Take the most recent Jewish astronaut in space, Jessica Meir. Dr. Meir was born in Caribou, Maine, the daughter of a Swedish mother who was a nurse and an Israeli father who was a doctor. Jessica attended the Aroostook, the Hebrew Community Synagogue in Presque Isle, Maine. Who knew there was a synagogue that far north? Meir earned her doctorate studying the penguins of Antarctica and was a NASA aquanaut before becoming an astronaut. On a recent mission, she not only was a full participant in the first all-female spacewalk, but managed to function successfully for more than 204 days in space. Her landing was uneventful. That is, if you don't count the unexpected period of quarantine she found when she returned home. The highlight of the astronaut section of Jews in Space is almost certainly to be a series of Jewish ritual objects put on loan to us by Dr. Jeffrey Hoffman, the first American Jewish man in space. Items on display will include the silver yod or Torah pointer shown here. Dr. Hoffman is the very first person to read from a Hebrew Torah in space. We will also put on display this dreidel, which he helpfully demonstrated on one of the nights of Hanukkah.
And Endeavor Houston, for Jeff, all of America would like to know what you've got and what you're doing with it.
Well, this is the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, and there's various ways that we celebrate it. And one of the games that we play is a little game with a dreidel, and it's something that you spin, and then you see which side comes up, and according to that, you either win or lose. And I was just trying to see how you might reinterpret the rules for spaceflight, since there's no up or down.
So aside from being an expression of ethnic pride, what significance, if any, can be attributed to twirling a dreidel on a space shuttle, or for that matter, counting the number of Jewish astronauts? At least part of that answer lies in the history of Jews in space, long before the first rocket left this planet. So where does the Jewish connection to space begin? Well, in the beginning, of course. The very first sentence of the fundamental charter of Jewish life, the Torah, speaks to the creation of the heavens, and the fifth sentence states that God called the light day and the darkness night, and it was evening and it was morning one day. The rabbis taught that the universe was bathed in primordial light until the sun, moon, and stars take over on the fourth day. The book of Genesis is foundational to many later Jewish rituals. The thrust of the Torah, indeed much of Jewish religion, is to bring order out of chaos. Torah is the home of 613 mitzvot, and whether you call them commandments or blessings, their overall purpose is to prescribe human behaviors, and quite often those behaviors are prescribed in relation to time. You might call it the original space-time continuum. Rituals happen at a specific time, and historically the only way to know time was to look into space. From antiquity, Jews took the first sentences of the Torah quite literally, believing that an evening followed by a morning constituted a day. That's why Jewish holidays begin and end at sundown rather than at midnight. And in traditional Jewish practice, hours were not exactly 60 minutes, but rather 1/12 of the time between sunset and sunrise, and then again 1/12 of the time between sunrise and sunset. This meant that in summer, a daytime hour might be 77 minutes long, and an evening hour just 42 minutes long. Given that the timing of prayers was linked to the time of day, early Jewish sages debated the question of what was actually meant by sundown. Was it when the last rays of the sun were visible on the horizon, or was it about 18 minutes later when 3 stars, the so-called secondary stars, were visible? This debate results in a Jewish concept of a twilight, a sort of temporal no man's land that exists between any 2 days. The complications of time led to the need for service schedule boards, like the one on the screen, that could be adjusted by season. And if time is challenging here on Earth, it's even more complicated in the space age. Think for a moment of the special problem for an observant Jew in space associated with the question of when to pray, or in Yiddish, when to daven, on their mission. The Jewish schedule of prayers is linked to sunsets and sunrises, but an orbiting space station typically passes through about 16 sunsets in a 24-hour span. Technically, this would mean that a Jewish astronaut who is observant would need to spend about 50% of his or her time praying. Yet some rabbinic authorities insist that this is the only solution. Others argue that this is a good reason Jews should avoid space travel. But my favorite answer is the one that suggests that rituals be kept relative to your point of departure from Earth. So if you're launched from Florida, the only sunset you need to worry about is when the sun goes down in Florida. And the complexity of Jewish timekeeping is not restricted to hours. The months were enough to inspire generations of astronomical observation. You see, Judaism follows a lunisolar calendar, with a typical year consisting of 12 months, alternating between 29 and 30 days, matching the phases of the moon, each month beginning with a new moon. In ancient times, official witnesses, armed with diagrams of the moon's initial crescent, would climb to the top of a mountain and declare Rosh Chodesh, a new month. The only problem with this approach was that the seasons are determined by a solar year. If the lunar cycle went unfettered, you would eventually end up with the Spring Harvest Festival, Passover, happening in the middle of winter. So a practice developed of periodically adding a leap month when the calendar threatened to become unhinged. Over time, the pattern for leap months was set to a metonic cycle of 19 years. The numeric code shown here is not the winning number in the lottery, but rather the years in which leap months are added according to a metonic cycle. The drawing on the screen illustrates the large calendar interactive that we plan to develop for the exhibit. Another calendar-connected artifact we'll put on display is this daily guide that belonged to Baltimore businessman Mendes Cone, who is not to be confused with his uncle, the war hero and adventurer, also named Mendes Cone, on who we developed an exhibit. It is part of the Jewish tradition of mourning to light a candle for a loved one on the anniversary of their death. Of course, this involves keeping track of their death on the Hebrew calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. And in this book, Mendes has put a yahrzeit reminder in handwriting on a list of important days. So Jewish astronomers look to the night sky to find a precise order in terms of time, but Jewish astrologers look to the stars to find clues to human destiny. Let me be clear, the Bible, in particular the Jewish prophets in the Bible, decry the work of astrologers and plead with people not to rely on them. But as this 1907 book on astrology illustrates, their admonitions were not always heeded. In fact, one of the most well-known expressions in Hebrew and Yiddish, mazel tov, commonly used for congratulations, literally means good constellations. It derives from a folk belief that our fate was foreshadowed by the stars. One of the most vocal opponents of these folk beliefs was a 12th century doctor and religious scholar, Maimonides. Maimonides wrote extensively on the topics of astronomy and astrology, in the first instance helping to synthesize the work of Aristotle and Greek philosophers with the emerging scholarship from the Arab world. As for astrology, he found it incompatible with Jewish beliefs in human free will. But Maimonides is just one of a number of important contributors to astronomical science in the Middle Ages. Two others who will be covered in the exhibit's timeline are Abraham Barhia, a prominent 12th century astronomer and mathematician, who's the first to publish a solution to the quadratic equation. And a century later, Levi ben Gerson, also known as Gersonides, invents the device shown here, the Jacob's staff, to measure the distance between stars. He concludes that the stars are about 10 billion times further away from Earth than Ptolemy and the Greeks had suggested, and he discovers something approximating the real size of space. Now, while the golden age of Spain produced some impressive astronomers, it's not the end of the story. Across the globe and across the centuries, Jewish interests in the study of space continued. Perhaps the best known scientist of all time, Albert Einstein. Now, the nitpickers on this audience may point out that Einstein won his Nobel Prize for his work on photoelectric effects, rather than his theories on space, time, and gravity. All I have to say to you is no photons, no photon torpedoes. Einstein's work definitely belongs among the stars. Einstein, however, is not the first Jewish Nobel Prize winner in physics. That honor belongs to Albert Michelson, the man who put the C into MC squared. His experiments measuring the speed of light would later be complemented by instruments he designed to measure the size of stars. There are so many things to be measured in space. Dr. Vera Rubin measured the rotation of galaxies. Her life was also a measure of social change. She was just the second woman astronomer elected to the National Academy of Sciences. In January, it was announced that the observatory being built in Chile by the US, the one shown here, will officially be called the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, the first of its kind in the world to be named for a woman. Some astronomers gained fame for research, others simply for popularizing science. In the latter category, one Jewish practitioner really stands out. The Brooklyn-born son of an immigrant garment worker, Sagan traced his interest in the wonders of the universe to an early childhood visit to the 1939 New York World's Fair. Sagan was admitted to the University of Chicago at age 16 and left 10 years later with a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics. Even before receiving his doctorate, he had been an advisor to NASA and used this contact to advance his lifetime interest in exploring extraterrestrial life. He led the team that put together the first message from Earth to aliens who might live beyond our solar system. This plaque launched on Pioneer 10 in 1972. He is also well remembered for his public television program Cosmos and the billions upon billions catchphrase that he popularized. This section of the exhibit ends with the profile of the astronomer who's still active in Baltimore today. Adam Rees, the grandson of refugees who fled from Germany in the 1930s, is a Bloomberg Distinguished Professor in Space Studies, Astronomy, and Physics at Johns Hopkins University. His academic specialty is in the study of supernovas and pulsating stars. He was awarded the 2011 Nobel Prize in Physics for providing evidence that the expansion of the universe is accelerating. One of his primary tools in providing this evidence was the amazing photography and data provided by the Hubble Space Telescope. And while its namesake astronomer, Edwin Hubble, is definitely not Jewish, no matter how many times Barbra Streisand calls out Hubble in The Way We Were. Several prominent scientists at Baltimore's own Space Telescope Sciences Institute have been. These include not only Dr. Rees, but also Israeli-American astronomer and best-selling author Mario Livio. In addition to the exploration of real outer space, the exhibit has a section on the exploration of the space of our imaginations. In a previous exhibit on Jewish comic book writers and illustrators of the golden and silver ages of superheroes, we made much of the connection between Jewish authors who were largely the children of immigrants and the friendly aliens that inhabited their stories. Certainly this is true for the more general question about Jewish encounters with alien worlds. It's true for talents in front of the camera. Here's my cousin Mandy in Alien Nation. Like Stan Lee in Marvel movies, Mandy gets guest cameo experiences in almost all my PowerPoints. But there also are influential behind the scenes personalities like Spielberg for Close Encounters and E.T. Even the musical score of space films has been written by Jewish composers, like Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner, who wrote the scores for Alien and Aliens, respectively. And we're planning to introduce a theremin interactive into the exhibit, celebrating the pioneering work of Bernard Herrmann in introducing that creepy electronic soundtrack into The Day the Earth Stood Still. Hugo Gernsback is not the first author of a science fiction work, but he is the first one to give that name to the genre. He also publishes the first magazine, Astounding Stories, that is fully dedicated to science fiction stories. The Luxembourg-born Gernsback was originally attracted to the field of electronic gadgetry and helped found the Wireless Association of America, an organization for amateur radio enthusiasts before World War I. When his interest in technology morphed into speculation about the future of inventions, he was in the right place to help found a fan movement for science fiction. While in his own lifetime he was accused of unscrupulous dealings with the authors who provided the content for his publications, today he is best remembered, especially by those gathered here, as the namesake of the Hugo Awards. We were very excited when we realized that the exhibit would be opening within the centennial year of Isaac Asimov's birth, though there's some ambiguity as to the exact date that he was born. The Asimov family came to America from Russia when Isaac was age 3. Though Asimov's works of science fiction, such as the Foundation trilogy, I, Robot, and Nightfall had become classics, the exhibit makes note of the fact that Asimov wrote on practically every topic imaginable, producing a library of more than 500 books as author or editor. And you can see in the elevation on the right, we will invite visitors to see how they stack up to the Asimov volumes. We're using Asimov as a measure. On the other hand, Asimov's history raises some fundamental questions about the significance of the fact that so many sci-fi authors come out of Jewish homes. Asimov, for example, while born into a Jewish family, identifies as an atheist and a humanist as an adult. Most of his writings have no explicit Jewish connection. An important exception to this was his decision to write a story in the foreword for Wandering Stars, a collection of 13 short stories on Jewish themes by Jewish authors. A recurring theme in these stories is the question of whether Jewishness is a matter of biology or ideology or ritual that makes you Jewish. In one story, a creature described as a pillow with tentacles wins acknowledgement as being Jewish. In another, it's a Yiddish-speaking loop caterpillar. Asimov himself sets a tone for the volume in his introduction. He writes, "My mother is Jewish and my father's mother was Jewish, and that makes both my father and myself Jewish." Continuing, I don't do anything about it, you understand. Attend no services, follow no rituals. It doesn't matter. I'm Jewish. While most of the authors featured in the sci-fi section of the exhibit are American, there are at least 2 Canadians as well. Toronto-born Phyllis Gottlieb, whose breakthrough post-apocalyptic 1964 novel Sunburst was so influential that the Canadian Award for Speculative Fiction is named after it. In 1981, Gottlieb pens a short story for the sequel to the Wandering Stars collection that focuses on the tale of the last Jew in the universe. Much of her work is centered on issues of gender and power. Boston-born Judith Grossman had a passion for Zionism and socialism, as well as science fiction. Taking the pen name Judith Merrill, she became an editor for science fiction publications, intent on raising the quality of sci-fi writing. Her vocal opposition to the Vietnam War led to her decision to move to Canada and become a citizen there. As I mentioned, the extraordinary contributions of Jewish comic book writers and illustrators was its own exhibit, Zap Pow Bam, 7 years ago. But Futurama deserves special mention for its numerous Jewish references. There are the Yiddish intonations of Dr. Zoidberg and the multi-tentacled beast called Yivo, named in honor of the Yivo Institute, where a friend of the writer for the episode worked. Close observers of the exhibit may notice that several items and photos on display in the exhibit actually come from the Yivo Institute. But perhaps the most remarkable sequence in the series is this bat mitzvah, with a robot being carried aloft on a chair and a misspelled Hebrew banner in the background that reads, "Today I am a robot," parodying the traditional expression associated with the bar mitzvah, "Today I am a man." Now I want to turn from the first bat mitzvah in space to the first rabbi in space. Babylon 5 was perhaps the only space drama series to feature an explicitly Jewish major character. Played by actress Claudia Christian, I couldn't make that up, Susan Ivanova is the lieutenant commander of the space station. In the episode TKO in season 1, her resistance to mourning for her father is oddly paired with a second storyline about a martial arts competition. Her rabbi comes to Babylon 5 station to persuade her to sit Shiva for her dad. Here is Theodore Bickel conducting a service for mourners as a rabbi in space.
Commander, may I have a word?
Of course.
I'd like to take your offer of leave.
Granted.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Commander,
Yes, sir?
I believe it's customary for friends to pay their respects during Shiva. I'll see you there.
I'd like that.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. As you know, we're all gathered here to help Susan sit Shiva for Andrei Ivanov, beloved husband of Sophia of blessed memory, father of Ganya of blessed memory, and of Susan. Most of you did not know Andrei Ivanov, so let me say a few words about him. He was a Russian Jew and a scholar, a man devoted to logic and to reason, and above all, to peace.
This marks the second JMM exhibit in which Theodore Bickel makes an appearance. His last one was on an exhibit on folk music, and next year he may be back again in our exhibit Blacklist, the Hollywood Red Scare. But I know what some of you are thinking. You've left out Bickel's most important sci-fi role as Sergei Rushenko, adoptive father of Lieutenant Commander Worf. Well, some of you are wrong. I just didn't want to spoil the big finish. The moment you've all been waiting for, the Jewish origins of the most famous alien gesture in history. Leonard Nimoy drew on his Orthodox Jewish background to suggest the famous greeting between Vulcans for the episode called Amok Time. Putting his hand in the shape of the priestly blessing, the letter Shin, which would not be a positive result in Jeffrey Hoffman's dreidel game, but which has to be acknowledged in the post-COVID-19 world as considerably more advanced than a handshake. And the item on the right is from atop an ark in Maryland synagogue. The Nimoy is just one of a number of Jewish actors associated with the Star Trek franchise. This includes not only major characters like William Shatner and Walter Koenig playing Kirk and Chekhov, but also minor characters like Sarek, Spock's father, played by Mark Leonard, or Arnie Darvin, the man who starts the trouble with Tribbles, played by Charlie Brill. While there are no explicitly Jewish characters in the franchise, the whole underlying gestalt of the Star Trek universe leads me to what may be a controversial conclusion. My final observation is going to channel Lenny Bruce. In his famous routine in the late 1950s, he divided the world into Jewish and Goyish, that is, non-Jewish. As in pumpernickel is Jewish and white bread is Goyish. I want to conclude by making the case that Star Trek is Jewish, Star Wars is Goyish. I say this not based on who plays the lead characters, but something much more fundamental. Star Trek, famously pitched as Wagon Train to the Stars, features ensembles of wanderers, many of whom are seeking to find their own identities. Spock, Data, Odo, and the EMH, among others, are positioned as living between the human world and a very alien identity. It's not just Seven of Nine who's struggling with issues of assimilation. By contrast, the Star Wars universe, with its roots in Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, is all about the emergence of singular heroes and villains. The Ubermensch will either save or destroy humanity. Its central questions are about destiny rather than identity. And that's why we'll display the text of the 4 questions from the Passover Seder in Klingon rather than a dialect of Wookiee in the exhibit. Well, that plus the fact that we hope to have Klingon language originator Marco Kron come and speak at the museum in October. And now I suppose I should come back from the brink, having taken such a big risk. I remind myself that this whole story began with a joke, and on a joke we will finish. I would remind you that Alan Sherman wrote his song about Harvey Bloom. There were no Jewish astronauts, and Star Trek had yet to record its first episode. If you feel like singing along, just go ahead. But remember, in space, when you're on mute, no one can hear you sing. For those of you who want to learn more about the JMM and the Jews in Space exhibit, I'm going to ask Trillian to share our web address and then to share the address of our hands-on family exhibit site, the Wondernauts, that we've developed in connection with the exhibit, at least as hands-on as anything is these days. Now I'm going to ask Trillian to read me questions from the queue and see what some of you can teach me.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to start with our questions in the Q&A section, and if we've got through those, then I'll move over to chat. But if you do want to submit a question, if you start with the Q&A, that would be great for us. Thank you. So the first question I've got here is any information about Robert Sheckley included in the exhibit beyond his story in Wandering Stars?
Not to the best of my knowledge. There are so many authors that we could have covered, Silverberg, Harlan Ellison, but we just, there's a limit to how much you can put into an exhibit. So we picked the ones that New York had picked and then added a few of our own.
Great. So the next question we've got here. What about the 2 Jewish astronauts on the ISS, one who left from Florida and one who left from Russia?
You're asking me about whether they can pray at the same time, daven at the same time? I suppose they would have to, following the theory of the rabbis who say it's from point of origin, that they would need to pray at different times.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over now to some of our questions in chat. So I think possibly this question, this comment came up before you had an opportunity to share the Wandering Stars cover, but someone was wondering if others in the crowd were old enough to remember the Wandering Stars anthology. So nice to know that you got there first.
One of the preparing for this presentation was actually reading Wandering Stars book, which I had not read prior to this exhibit coming our way.
Okay, I'm just popping back over. Okay, another question, and I'm sorry if I get the pronunciation wrong here. Is Mary Robinette Coel represented in the exhibit?
I do not believe so, though you've given us a name that we will look up and see what we can find out more about her.
Absolutely. And then, so another a question, and perhaps it's someone that missed this part. Somebody asked about praying when you're out in space and not being able to keep to an Earth calendar. So perhaps that's worth just recapping that for a moment.
There are several different rabbinic theories about the way in which you need to pray in space. There are some rabbis who are insistent that the rules are the rules, and that if every time you go for a sunrise or a sunset, you need to go with the morning and evening prayers. There are other rabbis who advise that it would be, this is another good reason why space is not for Jewish pilots. And the third theory is that if you leave from a spot on Earth, that you should take the time that spot is, you should take your cues on time from that position. So that third theory, by the way, was developed when they had a challenge with Antarctica. And what explorers there were obligated to do when the nights could last for several days.
Fantastic. So one question I've got here is about the links. I've just popped those in the chat for everybody again. Hopefully you can find those, and I'll do them one more time before we finish up for everybody. We've got a couple of more questions about suggestions or people that we might want to include in the exhibit or research further. So two names I'm seeing here are Arthur Davidson, one of the architects of the Hubble, and then also another individual, Gillian Pollock, who I believe is an Australian science fiction writer. Have I got that correct? Don't know, Marvin, if those names meant anything to you.
Not at the moment, but we are continuing to investigate. What opening in September has done is given us an additional window in which to explore some additional possibilities. I did notice that there was one chat item that asked me about my uniform.
Yes, that was going to be my next one.
And I can't resist sharing the fact that this has been hanging in my closet for 22 years. At the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, we did an exhibit called Star Trek Federation Science, one of my favorite exhibits ever. And so one of my team members made up this uniform for me. And that was the last time I wore it, was for the opening of that exhibit. And I thought that I've been fighting with my wife for 22 years, who says, why are you keeping that old uniform in the closet? And now I know why.
So it seems we've got a few more questions relating to sort of being observant while in space. And specifically, someone's asked, so if you, for example, were to leave Earth and go to Vulcan, you would still need to track the Earth calendar and not use the Vulcan calendar?
Well, you know, this is a fascinating question, because the practical issue has been limited to people in orbit, because that's all that there is. But for example, even if you weren't going as far as Vulcan, if you're going to the moon, does that change the question of when sunrises and sunsets are counted? And I am not entirely sure what the answer would be. That we'll have to consult with our rabbinic expert, another person we hope will come and speak in October.
Yes, we're definitely hoping to bring Rabbi Yergov back. So another question here, someone asking you if you can talk a little more to Star Trek, please. Asking about the values expressed in relation to Jewish culture and also any folklore that is included in the stories.
Well, you know, if you take a story like Little Green Men, one of my favorite episodes, you're dealing with the question of who is the alien and who is the human, since it imagines a world in which the Ferengi are the normal people, the people you can identify with, and the humans are behaving like aliens. I think that that's an example. I understand that the two people most closely involved in that episode, in developing the episode, were Ira Behr and Peter Miller, who are both Jewish showrunners for Star Trek. And so it isn't terribly surprising that so much of the alien universe of Star Trek, whether that's the Vulcans or the Klingons or the question of Ferengi, are connected to Jewish authors and Jewish writers. I'm not sure I answered the question very clearly.
I think it sounded good. So I'm going to say we've got a lot more suggestions here about people that we should be looking into. And so I can assure you I am writing all of them down while we've got all of these notes up here. Alan Stern is one that's coming up both on the Q&A and on the chat. I'm not seeing any more questions. I think that's everything that we've got in terms of questions. Do we want to give people just 1 minute? Another suggestion, Avram Davidson. Oh, hold on, we've got a question here. Okay, how would you handle the problem of assimilation if Jews were to travel to Alpha Centauri, which would take 800 plus years to go?
Well, you know, it's from generation to generation. Presumably, there are 2 ways you could get there. One would be in stasis, in which case you would, one would think that there would be prearranged plans for the continuation of the human race at the other end. And you could deliberately plan to have that be Jewish marriages at the other end. The other would be that their spacecraft would actually have a multi-generational experience. And given the history of Jewish development and evolution, my suspicion is that the Jewish identity that emerges at the other end will not be the same as the one that left Earth.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, my Star Trek knowledge is not good enough here to know that I'm saying this right. On the Star Trek Ustion, that makes sense? I was thinking.
I think he's meaning vision there.
That makes sense. I was like, it could be something I just don't understand. So on the Star Trek Vision, I was thinking of the values of communication and clearing up misunderstanding, making peace as opposed to an endless battle between good and evil. I wonder how much of that is rooted in Jewish culture.
I think a great deal of it is rooted in Jewish culture. I think that the idea that we don't live in a bifurcated universe with people being all evil or all good is something that comes out of the Jewish historic experience. And it is a Jewish value.
Fantastic. Oh, someone has asked it how they can donate to support to the exhibit. I'm going to take 2 seconds to pull that link, and then I'm going to leave Marvin to answer the question, which I'm guessing this is in sort of reference to observance, as to how traveling at light speed or faster, what that would do to the time of day relative to Earth.
That's an interesting question. Do you listen to your watch is going to be at a different pace when you hit light speed. I think that at that point, when we're ready to go to light speed, there'll be a new set of rabbis that will make a new set of declarations as to how to handle the situation. It's far above my pay grade. And while we're talking about donations, I do want to remind people as well that this program is brought to you by the Baltimore Science Fiction Society, and that they are also an organization that has needs public support. So I encourage you to consider them in your donation list.
I think that has got all of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trillian. You've been a great support.
Absolutely.
And thank you to the folks at Baltimore Science Fiction Society who put this on.